The prairie wind moved like an old widow's breath, long and tired, brushing past brittle fences and rusted weather vanes that had outlived every name etched into their foundation stones. Out here, nothing came easy but silence. It crept through the floorboards of the Granger Ranch and settled in the hollows of the man who once loved laughter. Elias Granger had been a husband. Once. He had been a dreamer too, the sort who'd build a home on bare land with calloused hands and nothing but will for a hammer. But dreams were brittle in the West. They cracked under stillbirths, under fever seasons, under lightning that didn't care who it burned. And 3 winters ago one took his wife. Just didn't bring her back from the porch. Now there was only work. And 2 little girls with long braids and wide eyes who didn't yet understand what silence cost man. June and Daisy, the twins, were 5. They laughed in twos, argued in whispers, and followed their father like ducklings through the dust. They were the only light in a house built of memory. Elias fed them, protected them, and sometimes, when the nights grew too long and the prairie too cruel, he sang lullabies he didn't remember learning. The town of Hollow Bluff was a place where hope didn't last long. The men there had hard shoulders and harder mouths. They didn't know what to do with a man who mourned quietly, who brought his daughters to town in matching blue dresses instead of frequenting the saloon with dirt under his nails and anger in his gut. They saw Elias's quiet as weakness. And weakness out here was a blood scent. It was on the tail end of one of those wind-scoured evenings that happened. Elias had just sold a bundle of cured hides and was tying up his mule cart outside the grain depot when the laughter started. Not the good kind. The kind that makes dogs lower their heads and children look away. He turned slowly. 5 men stood on the porch of the Rusted Spur Saloon, drunk, sunburned, and slick with the mean gleam of cowards in a group. Their leader, Caleb Finch, grinned through tobacco-stained teeth and jerked his thumb toward the alley. "Granger," he drawled loud enough to draw eyes, "we got you a gift. Figured a soft boy like you might enjoy a woman who can't run." The words hit Elias like dry gunpowder. He said nothing, just stared. Caleb whistled, and 2 of the men dragged out an old wooden handcart. In it sat a woman, pale as candle wax, limbs twisted, back curved like an abandoned fiddle. Her hair was the color of ash, braided once down her back in a way that had long since grown loose. She didn't speak, just blinked slow, one hand gripping the blanket that covered her legs. "Found her left behind in Eddington after the circus left town," Caleb went on, voice rising, eyes sparkling like something rotten. "Can't walk. Barely talks. But pretty enough, don't you think? You're always talking in strays." Laughter. All around. Cruel and cold and louder than the wind. Elias didn't look at the men. He looked at her. Her eyes, those were not the eyes of someone lost. No, they were sharpened to a quiet edge. Blue not like the sky, but like snow melt, clear, freezing, and dangerous if you step too deep. She was humiliated, yes, but not broken. Not yet. The twins tugged at his trousers. June, always the bolder one, whispered up to him, "Daddy, is she coming with us?" He didn't answer. Instead, Elias walked forward. Come, boots slow on the wood planks. The men parted, startled by the absence of fury in his face. He reached the cart. Kneeling, he removed his coat, brown leather, worn through the cuffs, and draped it over her shoulders. "I'm Elias," he said softly, just for her. "I've got space on my land, and no one will touch you there. If you'd like to come." She blinked again, then a tiny nod. He lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been. Her limbs didn't move much, just her fingers, curled like whispers. The silence that followed was thick, unbreathing. Caleb stepped forward, suddenly not so confident. "Hey now, we was just joking, no harm." But Elias didn't look at him, didn't raise his voice. He just carried her to the cart, laid her gently in the hay, and gestured for the girls to sit beside her. June offered her a string of blue ribbon she'd kept in her pocket. Daisy leaned close and whispered, "You can stay with us. We got a porch swing and a cat that don't like strangers." And still, the woman said nothing. Elias climbed onto the cart, gave one last glance at the gawking town, and cracked the reins. The mule groaned, the wheels creaked, and they disappeared into the long breath of dusk. They reached the ranch as the last of the sun bled over the grasslands. The house stood like an old soldier, scarred but upright. Clara, as they would learn her name to be, had not spoken a single word since they left town. But her hand had tightened just once on Elias's wrist when the wind picked up cold. Inside, Elias placed her in the room that had once belonged to his wife. He thought she might protest, might want to sleep in the barn or the kitchen corner. But she said nothing, just looked at the lace curtains swaying in the window, and the small wooden dresser with the carved handle that no longer shut quite right. He left her there, door open. The girls slept in their bed with muddy boots still on and cheeks red from windburn. Elias stood at the porch for a long time after the sky turned black, watching the stars, listening to the prairie speak in rustles and owl calls. He had not asked for this, but something in the way she had looked at him, measured, cautious, and still brave, felt familiar. Like the first time he saw rain after burying his wife. Unexpected, uninvited, but gentle. In the room behind him, Clara Wren lay in the dark, eyes open, listening to the house creak. It didn't sound like a place that judged her. Didn't smell like whiskey or sawdust or blood. It smelled like leather and cornmeal and girls who still giggled in their sleep. She reached slowly toward the nightstand, touching the blue ribbon left there by one of the twins. Her fingers curled around it like a prayer. Outside, Elias Granger lit his pipe, but didn't smoke it. He watched the sky, then looked toward the room again, toward the lamp he had left burning low beside her bed. A joke, they'd said, but she was not a joke, and the men who had given her away didn't understand what they had handed over. They had mistaken silence for defeat. Out here, that was a dangerous mistake. The stars blinked slow and heavy. Elias exhaled deep in his chest. Inside the house, something had changed, and the wind, for the first time in years, didn't sound so empty. The mornings came with the color of copper in the sky and the sound of sparrows weaving songs between the barn eaves. It was a quiet sort of life on the Granger Ranch, the kind where moments stretched out like the plains, wide and wordless, but full of meaning if you look long enough. Clara Wren had not spoken still, not in words, but her presence had begun to settle into the rhythm of the place like a needle threading slowly through torn fabric. Elias built her a ramp first, quietly, with no talk of favors or charity. Just pine wood, cut straight and nailed soft, as if apology lived in every strike of his hammer. She watched him from the porch, wrapped in a quilt June had laid across her lap. Her hands rested on the arms of the old wheelchair Elias had salvaged from the attic. His wife's father had once needed it long ago, before the war took his legs and grief took the rest. Clara's fingers drummed lightly against the wood, not impatient, measured, listening. The twins had taken to her in that fearless way children do. Daisy would braid her hair each morning with clumsy fingers and serious eyes. June brought her bird's feathers, pebbles shaped like hearts, and questions she couldn't quite answer. How come you don't talk? Does it hurt your legs? Did you like the circus, or was it just a lie they told you? Clara would smile. Small things. Cracks of light through old stone. And Elias? He stayed steady. Worked the fields, mended the fences, brought her tea steeped with mint leaves and pain root. He didn't press, didn't pry, but he watched, and in his watching there grew a kind of silent covenant. You're safe here. Speak when you're ready. Or don't. I'll still see you. One morning, the girls came running in from the creek, breathless with excitement, fingers stained from blackberry brambles. She was walking, Daisy declared. Not with her legs, but she moved her hands on the wheels. By herself. Clara said nothing, but her gaze dropped to her lap. Elias gave her a nod. Not a word, just respect folded into motion. Later that afternoon, he left a set of gloves beside her. Leather stitched tight. No speech. No explanation. Just a gift given without demand. That evening, when the sun painted everything gold and sorrowless, she wheeled herself to the edge of the porch and sat there, hands on her knees, watching the wind stir the tall grass like a memory. It was the beginning, but peace in the West rarely stayed long. Not when it was earned quietly. Not when men with no patience for dignity carried grudges like whiskey in their bellies. A week passed, and then Caleb Finch returned. Elias was in town trading feed grain for salt and lamp oil. The girls had stayed behind, asleep in the loft. Clara was on the porch, her lap draped with patchwork cloth and June's half-finished drawing of a bird with boots. The horse came fast, dust curling behind like smoke. He dismounted before the stirrups stilled. "Afternoon, miss," Caleb said, voice syrupy and false. "Came to check on how our little joke was working out." Clara stared at him, calm as flat water. He stepped closer. Too close. He wore a knife at his belt and the stink of corn mash on his breath. She moved not an inch. "You ain't said a word, I hear," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. "What's wrong? Cat got your dignity. Or maybe Granger's been playing husband, and don't like you talking out of turn." Still, she said nothing, but her hand shifted slightly, folding the edge of the cloth tighter. Caleb noticed. He grinned. "You're lucky, you know. Most men wouldn't bother. Hell, I ought to take you back, show the boys you're still breathing." That's when she raised her hand, not to strike, not to beg, just lifted her fingers slowly and pointed at the double-barreled shotgun hanging on the porch wall, then to the black cat curled by the door, who growled without getting up, then back to him. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. "You're not welcome." Caleb's grin wavered. He spat. "Should have let the coyotes have you." And then he turned, mounting up with more bark than confidence, and rode out. Clara's hands were shaking now, just faintly. She gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles paled. Elias found her like that when he returned, her eyes fixed on the horizon like she was stitching it closed with thought. He didn't ask what happened, just stepped past her, picked the shotgun off the hook, checked the shells, and placed it beside her chair. Next day, he built a second ramp, this one leading to the barn. Days passed. The girls began calling her Miss Clara. She still hadn't spoken, but they didn't seem to mind. They invented voices for her, cheerful, sarcastic, wise. Sometimes she smiled at their impressions. Once she even laughed, soft and low, like a creek hidden under ice. And something in Elias changed, too. His silence was no longer heavy. He spoke more at dinner, even chuckled once when Daisy told a story about a chicken chasing her into the outhouse. He started taking the girls fishing again. And every night before bed, he made sure Clara's room was warmed by the stove and the cat curled at her feet. One evening, after supper, he sat on the porch with her. A moon hung swollen over the prairie like a promise not yet kept. "I know you ain't ready," he said, "and you don't owe me nothing. But I reckon someone ought to say it plain." She looked at him. "You're not broken," he continued. "You're just still here. And sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can be." She didn't cry, but her hands trembled. Slowly, she turned the drawing June had left on the porch, a new one this time. A house. 4 figures. One in a chair, smiling. She traced her name in the dirt beside it with her fingertip. "Clara." He nodded. Then she did something unexpected. She pointed to his chest, then to the house, then drew a small circle in the air with her hand. "Family?" He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am," he said, "if you'll have us." No more words were needed. But just before bed that night, she wheeled herself down the hallway on her own. The girls had fallen asleep beside the hearth, their legs tangled, their hair smelling of soap and hay. She covered them with the quilt. Then she whispered her first word, soft, barely more than breath, "Safe," and went to her room. Elias heard it. He didn't move, just stood in the doorway, his hand on the frame, like it might disappear if he stepped too hard. Outside, the wind slowed. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled. Not danger, just weather rolling in. But here, inside, something else had shifted. Not everything had been mended, but something had begun. And nothing in the west was stronger than a thing that knew how to endure. Autumn slipped into the plains like a prayer whispered over dry soil, soft, sure, and laced with the scent of coming change. The cottonwoods along the creek turned their leaves to gold, trembling like coins in the wind, and the light bled longer across the sky, stretching out its final warmth before winter would arrive to test what had been built in silence. Clara had found her rhythm now, and the ranch pulsed differently because of it. She rose early before the girls stirred and wheeled herself to the barn where the dappled mare waited, eyes calm and knowing. Elias had fashioned a pulley system, something he'd seen once in an army hospital, though it took weeks of trial, error, and splinters to perfect it. It wasn't elegant, but worked, and more than once he caught Clara seated atop the mare, guiding it slowly through the pasture, back straight, hands firm, eyes lit with something he hadn't seen in anyone in years, quiet command. She was never alone. Not anymore. The girls followed her like shadows sown with laughter. They taught her songs, though she still used no voice. But Clara had learned to hum, low and steady, and sometimes if you were close enough, you could hear her echoing the old ballads back, like she was sewing her own story into them. But the past, like a snake in tall grass, has a way of slithering back when least expected. Elias heard it first, word in town muttered beneath breath, over poker chips and pipe smoke. Caleb Finch was organizing something. He'd gone up north, toward the mining camps, pulled in a few rough types with scores to settle. Men who drank without blinking, who called themselves justice when they meant ruin. "They say he's coming back," said Sheriff Tillman over his coffee one morning. "And he's not just John. You might want to think about moving her, Elias. Just until things quiet down." Elias stared into his cup. The steam rose slow. "She ain't a sack of grain," he said. Tillman nodded. "I know, but she's got eyes on her now. She ain't invisible anymore." That was the truth of it. Whatever Caleb had meant as mockery had become something else entirely. Word had spread about the woman in the chair who tamed horses with just her breath and hand, who taught a widower to laugh again, who raised 2 girls without standing once. The locals didn't mock her. They admired her. And that, more than anything, Caleb could not abide. Back at the ranch, Elias sharpened the axe slower than usual. The sound was a rasping whisper. Clara watched from the doorway, lips tight. "I heard," she said. Just those 2 words. The most she'd spoken at once. He looked up, met her gaze. "I'm not running," he said. She nodded, then pointed to the barn. Together they prepared. The pulley system was reinforced. A second ramp was added inside the tool shed. Elias taught Clara how to break down and load a pistol. She never asked to use it, but he showed her anyway. Not out of fear, out of trust. And the twins? They were told nothing. But even young hearts feel the tremble before the storm. That night, Daisy asked, "Are the bad men coming back?" Elias sat beside their bed, fingers folding the edge of the quilt. "Maybe," he said, "but we're safe." He looked at Clara, who stood in the doorway behind them, one hand resting on the wood frame, like a statue carved from grace and will. "We are," he answered. That night, Clara stayed awake. She sat by the window, watching the wind talk to the grass. Elias didn't sleep either. He sat beside her, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. No words passed between them. None were needed. The next day came wrapped in gray. Clouds sagged heavy over the fields, and the sky bore the color of hammered pewter. The chickens clucked nervously. The mare pawed at the dirt and snorted toward the hills. Midday brought silence thick as honey. Then hoofbeats. 6 of them, maybe 7. Caleb rode at the front, his coat billowing like a preacher's wrath, eyes full of smug ruin. The men behind him were loud, drunk, maybe, or just eager to spill the anger they'd been bottle-feeding for months. Elias stood by the gate, shotgun slung in one hand, face calm. Clara wheeled herself beside him. Caleb saw her and spat. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought the circus was gone for good." Elias didn't move. "You've had your joke," he said. "Now turn around." Caleb chuckled. "You think this patch of dirt makes you king?" She was a gift, Elias. A joke between men. Now she's got folks whispering, like she's some kind of legend. That don't sit right with me. Clara stared at him, unblinking. Then she moved. One hand reached down and pulled something from beneath the blanket on her lap. Not a weapon. A sketch pad. She opened it, turned it toward him. A drawing. Caleb, rendered in charcoal, with small hands reaching for him, tears streaming. A shadow behind him, faceless, bearing the shape of a whip. He froze. What's that supposed to be? She turned the page. Another drawing. Caleb, younger, standing over a child, smiling. But the child, wide-eyed, silent, was Clara. And suddenly, the truth was no longer a ghost. "She remembers," Elias said softly. Caleb went pale. Lies. But the men behind him were quiet now, watching, uncertain. "She was part of your show," Elias said. "Caged. Beaten when she wouldn't smile." "Shut up," Caleb growled. "She escaped. And you gave her to me not out of kindness, but to bury her. You knew people were starting to talk. You wanted her gone." "You don't know nothing," Caleb snapped. "I know enough." And then Clara lifted one last page. A drawing of the ranch, of Elias, of the girls, and herself, smiling, not from memory, but from truth. Caleb stepped back. "You think a few scribbles make you holy," he snarled. "You think you can shame me in front of—" One of his own men rode forward. "Is it true, Caleb?" Caleb hesitated. That was all it took. The man turned his horse. Another followed. Then a third. By the time dust settled, Caleb was alone. He stared at Clara like she had conjured ghosts. "You think this means it's over?" he hissed. Elias raised the shotgun. Not aimed, just steady. "It is for you." Caleb turned and rode away. When the last hoofbeat faded, Clara let out a long breath. And for the first time, She reached out, took Elias's hand. No words, just the grip of someone who had faced something ancient and survived. The girls ran out moments later, barefoot and blinking. Was that him? June asked. Clara looked down at them, then nodded once. But he's gone now, Daisy said. Clara smiled, then whispered, gone. And the wind picked up again. Not cruel, just clean, carrying with it the scent of rain, of endings and beginnings braided together. Later, they sat around the table. No grand speech, just stew and bread and quiet. Clara looked at Elias, then the twins, then out the window where the land waited, wide and wild. The sketchbook lay closed beside her, but its pages were full. And somewhere deep inside her, something had shifted again. Not healed, but blooming. Something new. The wind had changed. Even the cattle knew it, their movements more deliberate, their lowing soft and cautious, as if the air carried more than just the scent of coming frost. There was peace now, a fragile kind, like glass stretched thin over flame. Caleb Finch was gone, and with him, the shadow that had loomed over the ranch, but Elias knew the way fear worked. It didn't vanish, it hibernated. Clara was no longer just surviving. In the days after Caleb's retreat, something inside her had hardened, not into bitterness, but steel. She moved through the ranch with purpose, with ownership, her chair rolling over dirt and plank and grass like it belonged to the land itself. Her hands had grown calloused from hours of leatherwork, sketching, cleaning tools. She spoke now, not often, but clearly, carefully, as though every word spent cost her something, but earned her more. Elias found himself watching her more than he cared to admit. Not with pity, never that, but with a reverence he didn't know how to name. She had changed the shape of the house. Not just in how she arranged furniture for easier access, or how she insisted on mending clothes herself, but in how she stilled everything with her presence. Like she had finally become a part of something too big to run from. The girls adored her. June now followed Clara to the barn each morning with a notebook in hand, mimicking her sketches. Daisy tried to coax Clara to sing, but settled for the little hums that sometimes escaped when she brushed the mare's neck or ran her hands through wheat-colored strands of hair. They had become a trio bound by routine, trust, and silent, unspoken victories. Still, Elias didn't sleep much. He'd seen too much not to recognize the quiet before a storm. It came 3 weeks later. A single rider approached at dusk, no dust trail, just shadow rolling over earth. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle leaning casually against the doorframe, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. The rider stopped 30 yards out. A woman, tall, narrow, wrapped in black wool. Her face, when revealed, was sharp and unreadable. Her horse pawed once at the dirt. "I'm not here for violence," she said, voice clipped but calm. Elias nodded, but his hand remained near the rifle. She dismounted slowly, glancing toward the house. Clara appeared at the window, the lamp behind her casting her frame into silhouette. "I need to speak with the woman," the stranger said. "Clara." Elias's jaw tightened. "She don't speak to strangers alone." "She won't be alone." The woman looked him square in the eyes. "But she'll want to hear what I have to say." Inside, Clara rolled back from the window and opened the door herself before Elias could return. Her eyes locked on the visitor, and something flickered across her face, recognition. Pain. She wheeled forward slowly. The stranger lowered her head slightly. "Hello, Clara." Clara said nothing. The girls peeked from behind the kitchen archway, wide-eyed. "Who is she?" June whispered. "A ghost," Elias muttered. They met in the yard, a few paces between them, and stood there, one upright, one seated, but neither smaller than the other. "You don't remember me," the woman said. "Not fully, but I was there." Clara's fingers gripped the wheel spokes. "They called me Ivy," the woman went on. "I worked Caleb's circuit, not in the ring. Logistics, handling animals, selling to traders." Her mouth twisted. "I saw what he did to you. I didn't stop it." Clara's lips parted. No sound came. "I ran the night you vanished," Ivy said. "I thought he killed you. When I heard what happened here, I had to see it for myself. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." Clara's hand rose slowly. She pointed to Ivy's chest. "You carry it," she whispered. It was not a question. It was a truth. Ivy nodded. "Every day." Silence stretched between them, but it was not cruel. Then Clara said, "Stay for supper." Elias blinked. Ivy's eyes widened, then flicked toward the porch. Clara turned and wheeled back inside without another word. Ivy looked to Elias, who gave a small, reluctant shrug. She said it. That's all I need. The meal was quiet. The girls sat still, watching Ivy as though she might vanish if they blinked. Clara didn't look at her again, but set a second bowl down herself, her hand steady. They ate stew thick with root vegetables and smoked meat. Outside, the sun bled into the earth in long strands of gold and crimson. Afterward, Ivy rose. I'm going south, she said, to find the others. Some of Caleb's old girls. Maybe build something real this time. Not a stage. A sanctuary. Elias stood. You think they'll follow you? I don't know, she said, but someone needs to try. Clara nodded. Then she rolled forward and did something none of them expected. She extended her hand. Ivy took it. Her fingers trembled. Thank you, she whispered. And then she was gone. 3 days later, snow arrived early. Just a light dusting, but enough to hush the land in white breath. The twins ran outside, squealing with delight. Elias and Clara watched from a porch, wrapped in a shared blanket. You think she'll make it? Clara asked. Elias glanced toward the hills. She's got fire, he said. That'll carry her farther than fear ever did. Clara was quiet a long while. Then, I used to think I'd never matter again. He looked at her. You don't just matter, he said. You changed this whole damn place. She smiled. Not small, not shy, but full. I'm not done, she said. And he believed her. There was still rebuilding to do. Caleb's shadow would stretch long, even in absence. But something had shifted, not just in Clara, but in all of them. They'd become more than a stitched-together family. They were a testament to survival, to starting over, to carving dignity from the dust. That night, as the girls slept and the fire crackled low, Elias opened the cabinet and pulled out a small box. He handed it to Clara. Inside was a silver spur, polished, worn at the edges. It was my mother's, he said. She rode until her hips gave out. She said the spur wasn't for the horse, it was for the rider. A reminder to move forward. Clara traced its shape. I want you to have it, he added. You've earned it. She closed the box and held it to her chest. Outside, snow kissed the roof. The wind whispered low, carrying no threat, only promise. They had survived. But more than that, they had begun. If this tale touched something quiet in your soul, let us know in the comments below. Like this story, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and tell us, where are you watching from, friend? Until next time, may your sky be wide and your heart be steady.